Imagine this. A man sits alone at midnight, staring at the bottom of a bottle that has betrayed him 1,000 times before. His life is collapsing. His job slipping away, his relationships fraying, his body poisoned by the very substance he swore to quit. He tells himself he lacks discipline. He curses his weak will. He promises that tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow arrives and tomorrow fails him again. What if his failure is not about alcohol or drugs or gambling or the glowing screen he cannot put down? What if the true chain around his neck is something far older, far deeper, something that began long before he ever tasted the poison he now calls relief? Carl Jung once warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most addicts call it fate. They believe they were doomed by biology, by circumstance, or by some mysterious flaw in their own nature. But Jung's words force us into a more unsettling possibility. Perhaps the addiction is not merely a disease of the brain, nor a crime of willpower, but the return of something buried, something tied to the most intimate and yet most misunderstood relationship of all, the one with the mother. Pause here. What does your addiction, whatever its form, have to do with the woman who first held you, who first fed you, who first mirrored your existence back to you? Everything. And yet, almost no one dares to ask. The addict believes he reaches for the substance because he is weak. But weakness is only the surface. Beneath weakness lies a hunger, and beneath hunger lies the echo of a voice that once told him whether he was lovable, whether he was safe, whether he was enough. The substance becomes a surrogate mother, comforting, numbing, forgiving, yet always betraying. Addiction is a mother's embrace twisted into chemical form. Each sip, each hit, each spin of the wheel is an unconscious return to that primal source of security. But like a mother who withholds, who smothers, or who abandons, the substance never truly satisfies. Promises nourishment but delivers emptiness. It gives warmth only to leave you colder. It offers connection only to isolate you further. Think of it this way. The child who was not fully seen by his mother grows into an adult who seeks visibility in the glow of the cigarette, the burn of the whiskey, the flood of dopamine from the phone screen. The infant's cry that was not fully answered becomes the addict's endless reaching. The wound is ancient, the ritual is modern, but the dynamic is the same. We recoil from this truth because it implicates the sacred figure of the mother. To question the maternal bond feels like betrayal. Yet, to ignore it is to remain enslaved. Jung himself noted that the mother archetype is both life-giving and life-devouring. She is creation and destruction, nourishment and suffocation. The addict is caught in this paradox. He cannot separate from the mother he still unconsciously longs for, nor can he endure her absence. So here is the disturbing paradox. You do not drink because you want the drink. You drink because you want the mother. You do not gamble because you crave the game. You gamble because you crave the one who first taught you whether life was predictable or chaotic. You do not scroll endlessly because you love the screen. You scroll because you still long for the gaze that once defined your worth. The question is not, why can't I quit? The question is, whose arms am I seeking in this addiction? This is where the unraveling begins. In the next section, we must step into the hidden architecture of the psyche and examine how the maternal imprint, whether of warmth, neglect, or control, plants the seed of addiction long before the addict takes his first sip or pill. Close your eyes and imagine the very first world you ever knew. Not a city, not a home, not even the cradle. Your first world was your mother, her body, her rhythms, her voice, her absence, or her presence. Before you had language, before you had memory, you were suspended in that primal ocean. And what you absorbed there did not vanish. It became the soil of your psyche. Addiction, then, is not born on the day you first light a cigarette or take your first drink. It begins much earlier, in those preverbal years when your nervous system was still wiring itself to the emotional climate around your mother. A child whose cries are met with tenderness learns that the world is safe. A child whose cries are ignored or smothered learns that the world is either indifferent or suffocating. That lesson does not stay in the nursery, it haunts the adult years. Jung understood this duality when he spoke of the mother archetype. She is both the loving mother and the terrible mother. In her positive form, she nourishes the child into independence. In her shadow form, she devours, manipulates, or abandons. Addiction often emerges as the psyche's desperate attempt to reconcile with this shadow, an effort to fill a hole left by a mother who is either too absent or too engulfing. Picture the child whose mother is distant, emotionally frozen. He learns early that his need for comfort will not be reliably met. What does he do? He suppresses his longing, buries it deep, but the hunger remains. Later in life, when he discovers alcohol, it pours warmth into the frozen places. For a moment, the bottle becomes the mother who finally answers the cry. But because the wound was never healed at its source, the relief is fleeting, and the cycle repeats. Now consider the opposite. The mother who smothers, who controls every breath, who binds the child in invisible chains of dependence. The child grows up craving freedom yet terrified of it. Substances then become a way to rebel, to taste independence. But secretly, they also reproduce the suffocating cycle, for addiction itself becomes another form of imprisonment. This is the terrible irony. Whether through neglect or through overprotection, the maternal imprint can tilt the psyche toward addiction. It is not about blame, it is about recognition. Addiction is not simply a war with chemicals. It is a war with memory, with the first relationship that shaped our very sense of self. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." The addict embodies this tragedy. He may desire freedom, but his very desires are programmed by that early maternal blueprint. His will bends unconsciously toward the bottle, the needle, the phone, as if fate itself were guiding his hand. Yet it is not fate, it is memory disguised as compulsion. And so, when we ask why addicts relapse even after years of sobriety, the answer is not simply chemical dependency. The relapse is a regression to the primal hunger, the infantile longing that has never been fully named. Addiction whispers the oldest promise. This time, you will finally be held, but the substance cannot mother you. It can only seduce you into reenacting the wound. To overcome addiction, one must look backward, not only forward. One must have the courage to confront the maternal shadow, whether it appeared as abandonment, engulfment, or unpredictable chaos. Only by naming it can the unconscious compulsion begin to loosen. Otherwise, the addict fights a ghost with weapons that always fail. In the next section, we must travel deeper into Jung's concept of the mother complex, exploring how this invisible psychic pattern binds the addict to a cycle of longing and despair, and how the very act of repression strengthens the chains that hold him captive. Carl Jung spoke often of what he called the mother complex, a psychic structure lodged deep in the unconscious that governs how one relates not only to women, but to life itself, to nourishment, to dependence, to authority, and, ultimately, to the self. When unresolved, this complex becomes the silent architect of addiction. It is the prison whose bars cannot be seen, only felt, each relapse a rattle of chains forged in childhood. To understand this, picture the psyche as a house. The conscious mind is the front room, the well-kept space where we show guests, where we perform competence and self-control. But beneath that house lies a cellar, the unconscious, where neglected memories and unresolved emotions accumulate. In the darkest corner of that cellar lies the mother complex, still alive, still breathing, still shaping the adult's choices in ways he does not recognize. The addict often believes he chooses the substance. But the substance is not chosen, it is compelled. The drug, the drink, the ritual is merely the outer mask of an inner figure, the maternal presence that was never integrated. When the mother was cold, the addict seeks warmth in chemicals. When the mother was smothering, the addict seeks rebellion through intoxication. When the mother was inconsistent, the addict craves the predictable chaos of the substance. This is why addiction is so persistent. It is not simply chemical dependency but psychic reenactment. Each intoxication is an unconscious ritual that says, perhaps this time, mother will come through. Perhaps this time, the wound will close. But the wound is not healed through repetition. It is deepened. The unconscious clings to its pattern, feeding on each relapse as proof of its power. Here lies a devastating truth. The mother complex is not only about your personal mother. It is about the archetypal image of the mother, the universal psychic imprint. That is why even those who grew up with good enough mothers can still fall prey to its gravity. Addiction can be a response not to one woman, but to the archetypal mother who lives in every psyche, embodying both the life-giver and the life-destroyer. Nietzsche once declared, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." In addiction, the addict fights with his own unconscious monster, the devouring mother within. But instead of slaying it, he becomes enslaved to it, turning his life into a battlefield where the monster always wins. Notice how this plays out in daily life. The addict promises himself, "I will quit." The conscious mind rallies with determination. But the unconscious whispers, "You cannot quit me. I am your comfort. I am your mother. I am your fate." The addict is torn between two voices, discipline and desire, will and compulsion. He loses not because he is weak, but because the battle is fought on the wrong field. He tries to overcome chemistry, when in truth he must overcome archetype. So long as the mother complex remains unexamined, the addict's freedom is an illusion. Rehab centers, 12-step programs, therapies, these may provide relief, but without confronting the unconscious archetype, the chains remain intact. The addict may experience sobriety, but the complex waits in the shadows, ready to reassert itself the moment vigilance slips. To escape, one must descend into the cellar and face the figure head-on. Not to blame, not to accuse, but to see. For as Jung taught, the things we refuse to see control us the most. In the next section, we will explore why repression of this maternal wound, our refusal to confront the uncomfortable truth, actually strengthens addiction, and how bringing the shadow into light is the first step toward liberation. The addict's greatest tragedy is not his craving, nor even his repeated failure to abstain. His tragedy is repression, the refusal, conscious or unconscious, to confront the original wound. What is repressed does not vanish. It sinks, festers, and grows teeth in the darkness of the psyche, emerging again and again disguised as addiction. Consider the child who was never allowed to feel anger toward his mother. Perhaps she was fragile or volatile or sanctified by culture and family. To express rage at her neglect or suffocation would have been forbidden. So the child swallows his anger, represses it, hides it beneath obedience or silence. That anger does not die, it transforms. Years later, it returns as a craving, a compulsion, an uncontrollable appetite. This is what Jung called the shadow, the collection of emotions, instincts, and truths we cannot accept in ourselves. And nothing is more likely to fall into the shadow than ambivalence toward the mother. For to admit she was absent or devouring feels like betrayal. And so the psyche hides the truth from itself, exiling it to the unconscious. But what is hidden controls us. Think of repression like a pressure cooker. Each unspoken grief, each silenced rage, each unacknowledged need adds steam. Addiction is the release valve. A drink, a pill, a hit to let the steam escape. But because the source of the pressure remains unaddressed, the relief is temporary. Soon the pressure builds again, and the addict reaches once more for the substance. The cycle repeats endlessly with increasing intensity. Here we confront a brutal paradox. The very act of trying to move on without naming the maternal wound actually binds the addict more tightly to it. The harder he tries to forget, the stronger the shadow becomes. The more he insists that his addiction has nothing to do with childhood, the more his childhood dictates his fate. Viktor Frankl once wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Addiction is precisely this challenge. The addict cannot change his mother, nor alter the past. He cannot go back and be reparented, nor rewrite the years of neglect or suffocation. But he can confront the shadow within himself. He can bring into consciousness what was once forbidden to feel or to know. That act of confrontation is not easy. It feels like death because it is the death of illusion. And yet, without it, there is no freedom. The addict who represses his rage toward his mother will continue to drink that rage in liquid form. The addict who represses his grief will continue to inhale it through smoke or needles. The addict who represses his longing will scroll endlessly, staring at a glowing screen that never embraces him. Integration of the shadow does not mean demonizing the mother. It means acknowledging both truths. She gave life and she wounded. She nurtured and she failed. To carry both truths without denial is the essence of psychological maturity. But most addicts cannot bear this tension. So they flee back into their substance, back into the fantasy of a mother who only soothes and never wounds. This is why recovery is not merely about abstinence. Sobriety without shadow work is fragile, brittle, waiting for the first storm to shatter it. Real recovery requires descent into the unconscious, a confrontation with the hidden rage, grief, and longing that fuel the compulsion. In the next section, we will turn toward that descent, not as metaphor but as lived necessity. We will explore how the confrontation with the inner mother, terrifying though it may be, is the only doorway through which lasting transformation can occur. Imagine standing before a mirror that does not reflect your face, but your soul. In its glass you do not see your features, but the figure of your inner mother, the psychic presence who has lived within you since birth. She may appear as gentle or suffocating, or absent, or terrifying, but she is there, shaping every hunger, every fear, every desire. To confront her is to confront yourself. For the addict, this confrontation is both dreaded and necessary. Dreaded because it threatens the deepest illusion, that the substance can stand in for the mother, that one more drink, one more hit, one more night lost in intoxication will finally soothe the wound. Necessary because without facing the inner mother, the cycle cannot break. The confrontation often begins in resistance. Rage floods the psyche. Why should I blame my mother? She did her best. She sacrificed for me. And perhaps she did. But the confrontation is not about blame. It is about truth. Your mother may have been loving in many ways and wounding in others. Both can coexist. Until this paradox is held consciously, addiction will continue to carry the unbearable weight. Jung warned that the mother archetype has two faces, the great mother who nourishes and the terrible mother who devours. Addiction is the psyche's attempt to cling to the great mother while denying the terrible mother. But denial gives her more power. Only by seeing both faces can the addict begin to free himself. Picture the addict sitting in silence, recalling his earliest memories, the moments he felt unseen, unheard, suffocated, or abandoned. As these memories surface, waves of grief and anger follow. At first, he may try to repress them again. But if he endures, if he allows the feelings to rise, something shifts. The rage that once drove his compulsion becomes conscious. The grief that once poisoned his cravings becomes mourned. The longing that once chained him to the bottle is finally named. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." This is the heart of the confrontation. You cannot undo the past. You cannot choose the mother you received. But you can choose what to do with the imprint she left. You can confront it, integrate it, and transform it. Or you can flee from it, repeating the same cycle until it destroys you. For many, this confrontation feels like betrayal. To admit that one's mother wounded is to shake the foundation of identity itself. But betrayal of illusion is not betrayal of love. In fact, true love for the mother becomes possible only after her image is no longer split into saint and demon. Only then can she be seen as fully human, fallible, limited, yet real. And here is the paradoxical gift. When the addict confronts the inner mother, he begins to mother himself. He learns to soothe his own pain without substances, to nurture his own body without toxins, to comfort his own soul without illusions. What he longed for outside, he begins to provide inside. This self-mothering is the turning point. For the first time, the addict no longer needs the bottle as surrogate mother. The compulsion loosens, not by force of will, but because the psychic hunger has finally been acknowledged and fed with truth rather than illusion. But the journey does not end here. Confrontation is only the beginning. To sustain freedom, the addict must move beyond the mother altogether, into individuation, into becoming fully himself. That final step, which Jung called the path to wholeness, requires not only facing the past but also transcending it. In the final section, we will explore this process of individuation, how one moves from bondage to freedom, from addiction to authenticity, and why the deepest liberation comes not from rejecting the mother, but from integrating her and walking forward as a whole conscious being. There comes a moment when the addict, having faced the shadow of his inner mother, stands at a crossroads. Behind him lies the endless cycle of craving and relapse, the desperate attempt to return to a womb that no longer exists. Before him lies a road unknown, a road Jung called individuation. The process of becoming whole, of integrating the fragments of the psyche into a unified self. This road is not paved with ease. It is not the blissful freedom many imagine. Individuation begins with rupture, with the realization that no substance, no ritual, no other person can ever fill the primal void. It is the painful acceptance that the mother cannot be returned to, that her absence or her suffocation cannot be undone. It is standing naked before existence and asking, "Now, who am I, apart from her?" For many addicts, this question feels unbearable. The mother, whether nurturing or wounding, was the first mirror of identity. To step beyond her is to step into nothingness, into the terrifying freedom of self-definition. And yet, this is precisely where transformation occurs. Individuation demands that the addict stop seeking the mother in bottles, needles, lovers, or glowing screens, and instead turn inward to cultivate the father within. The principle of structure, boundary, and independence. But it also demands that he not reject the mother entirely. Wholeness comes not from denial, but from integration, holding both the nurturing and the wounding, both the comfort and the terror, as parts of the self. Aldous Huxley once reflected, "Experience is not what happens to you. It's what you do with what happens to you." The addict's experience, his suffering, his endless cycles, his confrontations with despair, becomes, in individuation, raw material for meaning. What once felt like punishment becomes initiation. What once enslaved becomes the forge of freedom. Individuation is not about perfection. It does not promise that cravings vanish forever, or that wounds close without scars. It promises something deeper, that the addict learns to carry his wounds consciously, rather than being unconsciously carried by them. He learns that longing cannot be annihilated, but it can be transformed. The hunger that once drove him to destruction can be redirected toward creativity, intimacy, and self-realization. Picture the man who once drank to silence his grief now writing, painting, or speaking that grief into the world. Picture the woman who once numbed her loneliness with substances now learning to sit with herself, to cultivate solitude into wisdom rather than torment. These are not fantasies, they are the natural fruits of individuation, when the inner mother is no longer a tyrant but a presence integrated within the whole. And perhaps most profoundly, individuation reveals that the addict's wound is also his gift. For in confronting the shadow of the mother, he has touched the very depths of the human condition. The hunger for connection, the fear of abandonment, the tension between dependence and freedom. His story, once a chain of shame, becomes a source of compassion for others still bound. The path does not end in detachment from the mother, but in transformation of the bond. The addict learns to say, "You are part of me, but not all of me. You shaped me, but you do not define me. I honor you. I forgive you. I release you." In that release, he steps into the fullness of his own being, not as a son or daughter clinging to the past, but as a conscious self walking into the future. Here lies the truth. You will not overcome your addiction until you understand the mother within you, until you confront her, integrate her, and finally transcend her. Beyond that threshold lies freedom, not the fragile freedom of abstinence alone, but the profound freedom of authenticity, of wholeness, of becoming who you truly are.